Hello. Well, I have some really good news here. In all the disasters, obviously they didn't tell us this until it was all over, but it's a whole lot of Afghan women under threat from the Taliban have been extracted from that unfortunate country in a secret operation that even 2 years ago would have been the stuff of a science fiction story. Well, okay, as the cognoscenti like to call it, speculative fiction, not science fiction. Excuse me, this is my lunch. But whatever. It was something that, as I said, even 2 years ago, it would have had absolutely no connection with reality. A team comprising Israel and the United Emirates cooperated to get a bunch of Muslim women out, and a few men, I think, too, who were in danger from other Muslims out of a Muslim country. A very Muslim country. Here's the article. Dozens of Afghan women rescued from Kabul in first ever Israeli Emirati aid mission. Oh, the print on this is showing up rather small. Just a minute, I'm going to make it bigger so I can read it more easily. Oh yeah, here we are. Israeli aid workers and the United Arab Emirates have completed a daring rescue mission. Yeah, it was daring. A daring rescue mission that saw dozens of sportswomen, female rights activists, and a singer at risk of Taliban reprisals spirited to safety in Abu Dhabi. The nail-biting evacuation used local contacts to gather 41 Afghans from various locations in Kabul and then bus them through Taliban checkpoints and over the northern border into Tajikistan before flying them to the UAE. I did a check there, and Tajikistan has diplomatic relations with Israel, so that would have helped, of course. But I'm interested in this story for two separate reasons, and the first and most striking issue in all of this is that at last a Muslim country on the Arabian Peninsula is doing something to help its Muslim brothers and sisters displaced by fundamentalism. Now, for sure, there are refugees in all of these countries. But it seems to me more that the refugees actually just arrived than that they were actively rescued. This is a situation of a different order altogether. In general, the devastation occurring in Muslim countries has been left to the good attentions, for better or worse, of the West. But in this case, the Emirates are taking control and they're rescuing women who've been, were in danger of being drowned in Muslim fundamentalism. It's not only a brave and imaginative act, but it's also a message. The Emirates are not exactly a secular society, are they? And yet they're saying not only that the rest of Islam is responsible for other Muslims in an active way, but in a more proactive way that's more proactive than just a bit of zakat, Muslim charity. But they're also recognising that there's a branch of Islam which is unacceptable even by their fairly strict standards. That's really a good sign. I just hope it's a bud that will flower. But the second thing is this: a fully and well-established Muslim country not only has diplomatic relations with Israel, but actually cooperated with them in a flamboyant and daring rescue mission. And I think I know why they asked the Israelis into this party, by the way. You see, fortuitously, I've just finished reading a book called Red Sea Spies, The True Story of Mossad's Fake Diving Resort. It's a fascinating story, an epic, actually, of old-fashioned daring do and true grit from both the rescuers and even more, I'd say, from the rescued. I'd recommend it for a really good read to anyone. This isn't a book recommendation video, by the way, but I do have to give you the background. What happened was that there were a lot of Ethiopian Jews stuck in Ethiopia in the 1970s during a lot of upheaval, and they were under a lot of pressure, being a minority. And Menachem Begin was the Israeli Prime Minister, who decided Israel had to get them out and tasked the Mossad with the job. The problem was that the Jews had no legitimate way of getting to Israel from Ethiopia because at the time, Ethiopia, under pressure from surrounding Arab countries, had broken off any sort of relations with Israel, I think 1973. The next country along where there were also many Ethiopian refugees, and that included some Jews, was Sudan, a thoroughly Muslim country which certainly had no diplomatic relations with Israel, and where in fact it was probably, well, according to the book, it was dangerous even to be identified as Jewish. So the Jewish refugees who fetched up there in the DP camps had to hide their identity. So, to cut a very long story short, it's quite a thick book, the Mossad agents posed as Swiss businessmen who wanted to establish a diving resort on the Sudanese coast in the Red Sea, diving in the Red Sea, which was a very unspoilt waterway. And using that as a cover, they made truck journeys into the camps hundreds of miles away, and using some Ethiopian Jews who could go into the camps in relative anonymity, they managed to identify and extract groups of Jews, truck them back down to a meeting point, and either get them out by plane or by dinghy into Israeli army boats, which were parked out at sea disguised as merchant ships. Any one of the Sudanese would have just machine gunned the lot of them if they'd been caught. It's far more epic even than that, though. You see, I'd heard of the story, but had the idea that it was a group of Mossad agents riding in there like knights on chargers to rescue these helpless, primitive people from the backlands of Ethiopia. But I had absolutely no idea about the strength of will, the grit, the determination of the Ethiopian Jews themselves. They got messages that there was a chance they could go to Jerusalem. They didn't even know about Israel. They walked for hundreds of miles from their villages in the Ethiopian highlands to the refugee camps, braving swamps, jungles, deserts, and mountains to get to an uncertain fate in a hostile Sudan. I think about 10% of them died in the journey. That isn't even a taste of what went on, by the way. It's a remarkable story. Oh, and while I'm on the subject, I have to make another point. When people from North Africa come to towns in Europe and misbehave, raping or murdering or whatever, or blowing themselves up, that sort of thing, people make excuses for them. They come from primitive areas. They don't know how to act in civilized European societies, and they don't know how to treat women and so on. Well, these guys from Ethiopia were so isolated and living in such primitive states that they didn't know about Israel. They only knew of Jerusalem. And that as it was a sort of mythical shining city on the hill. Some of them, when they got on the Israeli ships, thought they were in Jerusalem already and started kissing the deck. On one occasion, some who were supposed to be shipped out by plane, they ran away when the plane landed because they thought it was a monster. The point is, they were in a far more primitive state than the immigrants from, let's say, Algeria or Morocco or even Gabon. But so far as I've been able to work out, when they got to Israel, they knuckled down, became model citizens who managed to absorb the rules of civilized city life. And yeah, I believe the older generation often did have difficulties, because they'd spent their whole lives in, oil lamp land. But their children, so far as I've been able to work out, are completely integrated into modern society. And no stabbings and upblowings. Just saying. Anyway, enough of that. The point is that the Israelis had developed ways and techniques of extracting people from closely watched situations, which no secret service who wanted to know how to do this could ever ignore. Of course, I don't know how they did it, but I think there must be quite a few Israelis with, for instance, Afghani parentage who might have been able to get into Kabul posing as natives. Whatever. I have to point out that this was a bunch of Israelis risking their lives for a bunch of Muslims, and with the cooperation of another bunch of Muslims who were also risking their lives. And as I said, if you'd have told me this 2 years ago, that this was going to happen, I'd have suggested you stop drinking that funny tea. It's a marvellous story. The Emirates showed their responsibility, and the Israelis showed their willingness to offer their experience and expertise to their neighbours in a humanitarian cause. And good luck to those people who got out of Afghanistan and found sanctuary in other Muslim countries where their lives wouldn't be threatened. It's really amazing news. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Grambo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.